Imagine waking up one morning and everything feels normal at first. You check your phone, scroll through the news, and nothing seems unusual. But when you step outside, something feels off. Prices have changed overnight. And you don't understand why. You walk into a store expecting to buy your usual groceries. But something shocks you instantly. The prices are almost double what they were yesterday. You look around, thinking it's a mistake. But everyone else looks just as confused. Fuel prices have surged without warning. Your daily commute suddenly feels expensive. Even a simple ride now costs significantly more. You start calculating your expenses in your head. And it doesn't add up anymore. You open your phone again, searching for answers. But there is no breaking news about a crisis. No announcement of war or disaster. Everything appears normal on the surface. Yet something is clearly wrong. There were no explosions, no sirens, no chaos. No visible signs of destruction anywhere. The streets are calm, people are moving as usual. But beneath this calm surface, something invisible is happening. A silent shift has begun. Ships across the world have started slowing down. Some have stopped moving completely. Ports are getting crowded with delays. Goods are not reaching where they should. And no one is talking about it loudly. Prices begin to rise everywhere, slowly but steadily. Not just in one country, but across the world. Food, fuel, electronics, everything becomes expensive. It feels like a pattern, not an accident. Something bigger is unfolding. Countries are not cooperating like they used to. Trade relationships are quietly changing. Agreements are breaking without headlines. Nations are starting to prioritize themselves. And alliances are shifting. This is not a war you can see on television. There are no soldiers on the battlefield. No weapons being fired in public. Yet the impact is just as real. And just as dangerous. This is a different kind of war. A war fought with policies, not weapons. A war driven by power, not territory. A war that affects your life without you noticing. This is the silent war destroying global trade. For decades, the world followed a simple idea. Countries believed that trading with each other would create wealth for everyone. It sounded logical and promising. And for a long time, it actually worked. This idea shaped the modern global economy. Nations began to specialize in what they do best. Some produced cheap goods at massive scale. Others focused on innovation and technology. Resources were extracted from specific regions. And everything became interconnected. Massive cargo ships carried goods across oceans every day. Planes transported high-value products across continents. Supply chains stretched across thousands of miles. Everything moved with precision and efficiency. It was a perfectly synchronized system. A single product could involve multiple countries. Raw materials from one place, manufacturing in another. Assembly in a different region. And finally, sold somewhere else. The world became one giant production network. This system made goods cheaper than ever before. Consumers benefited from low prices. Companies scaled rapidly across borders. Economies grew faster than ever. It felt like a golden age of trade. Global trade exploded in value over time. Trillions of dollars moved across borders every year. Countries became deeply dependent on each other. Interconnection turned into reliance. And reliance slowly became a risk. Because not everyone benefited equally. Some countries gained massive advantages. Their industries grew stronger and more competitive. Others began losing jobs and factories. And the imbalance started growing. Workers in many countries began to feel the pressure. Jobs moved overseas where labor was cheaper. Local industries struggled to survive. Communities started declining economically. And frustration began to rise. Governments could no longer ignore this shift. Political pressure started building internally. Citizens demanded protection for local jobs. Economic policies began to change slowly. And the tone of global trade started shifting. What once felt like cooperation started turning into competition. Countries began thinking about their own survival first. Trust between nations started weakening. And the foundation of global trade began to crack. This was the beginning of the silent conflict. To understand this conflict, you need to understand one simple tool. It's not a weapon in the traditional sense. Yet it can damage entire economies. Governments use it quietly but powerfully. It's called a tariff. A tariff is basically a tax on imported goods. When a country adds a tariff, foreign products become more expensive. This gives local businesses an advantage. On the surface, it looks like protection. But underneath, it's a strategic move. Imagine buying a product that suddenly costs more just because it came from another country. You don't change your needs, but your choices become limited. Slowly, you start buying local alternatives. And the system begins to shift. Governments justify tariffs as protection for jobs. They claim it helps local industries grow. And sometimes, it actually does. Factories reopen. Production increases. But this is only one side of the story. Because when one country imposes tariffs, the other country doesn't stay silent. It responds with its own tariffs. This creates a chain reaction. One move leads to another. And tension begins to escalate. This is how a trade war begins. Not with violence, but with policies. Not with soldiers, but with economics. Each side tries to protect itself. And in doing so, they hurt each other. As tariffs rise, trade slows down. Goods become expensive to move across borders. Companies start losing profit margins. And supply chains begin to weaken. The system becomes less efficient. Businesses are forced to adapt quickly. Some shift production to different countries. Others increase prices for consumers. And many struggle to survive. The pressure spreads across the economy. Consumers eventually feel the impact. Products become more expensive. Choices become limited. Quality sometimes drops. And everyday life becomes harder without a clear reason. And the most dangerous part is how invisible it all feels. There are no dramatic headlines every day. No obvious signs of conflict. But the damage keeps building slowly. This is the silent nature of the war. For a while, this silent conflict remained under control. Trade slowed, but the system still functioned. Countries adjusted and adapted to the tension. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Then something unexpected happened. The world came to a sudden halt. Factories shut down almost overnight. Workers stayed home, and production stopped. Entire industries paused without warning. The system that once moved smoothly began to freeze. Ports became overcrowded with cargo that couldn't move. Ships were stuck waiting for days, even weeks. Containers piled up with nowhere to go. The flow of goods was disrupted at a global scale. Supply chains began to collapse under pressure. One delay caused another, and then another. A single missing component could stop entire production lines. Everything was connected, and everything was breaking. Businesses started facing massive losses. Orders were delayed or canceled. Costs increased rapidly. Companies that once thrived now struggled to survive. Uncertainty spread everywhere. Consumers felt the impact almost immediately. Shelves in stores began to empty. Essential goods became harder to find. Panic buying started in some places. Fear quietly entered everyday life. Shipping costs skyrocketed like never before. Moving goods across oceans became extremely expensive. Companies passed these costs on to consumers. And prices surged even higher. Suddenly, countries realized something dangerous. They were too dependent on each other. Critical supplies came from limited sources. And when those sources failed, everything stopped. This was a wake-up call. Essential industries were hit the hardest. Medical supplies, semiconductors, and energy resources became scarce. Governments struggled to secure what they needed. Competition intensified quietly. The stakes became much higher. This was the turning point. The moment countries changed their thinking. Global cooperation was no longer enough. Survival became the priority. And the silent war entered a new phase. After the shock, countries began to rethink everything. They realized the system they trusted was fragile. Depending on others suddenly felt risky. Leaders started asking hard questions. And the answers were uncomfortable. What happens if supplies stop again? What if critical goods never arrive? What if another crisis hits unexpectedly? These questions started driving new decisions. Fear began shaping economic policy. Countries decided to reduce their dependence on others. They wanted control over their own resources. Local production became a priority again. Self-reliance started gaining momentum. And globalization began to slow down. Governments introduced policies to boost domestic industries. Incentives were given to local manufacturers. Investments were redirected inward. And global supply chains started shrinking. The focus shifted to national strength. This shift was called economic nationalism. It sounds protective and safe, but it comes with a cost. Efficiency is lost when everything is produced locally, and prices start to rise again. Companies began relocating their production units. Some moved closer to home. Others diversified across multiple countries. The goal was simple: never depend on just one source again. This restructuring was expensive and slow. It required massive investments. Infrastructure had to be rebuilt from scratch. Supply chains had to be redesigned completely. And uncertainty still remained. Meanwhile, global trade continued to weaken. Fewer goods moved freely across borders. Restrictions increased gradually. Trust between nations declined further. And the silent war intensified quietly. Countries also began forming new alliances. Not based on friendship, but on strategic needs. Trade agreements became selective. Partners were chosen carefully. And rivalries became more defined. The world was no longer one unified market. It was slowly dividing into blocks. Each group protecting its own interests. Each side building its own system. And the global economy started fragmenting. Now the impact starts reaching your daily life. Not as headlines, but as small changes. Prices increase little by little. Bills start getting heavier. And your budget begins to feel tighter. At first, it feels manageable. A slight increase in groceries. A bit more for fuel. Maybe a higher electricity bill. Nothing too alarming yet. But it keeps adding up. Then you start noticing patterns. The same products keep getting more expensive. Discounts become rare. Offers disappear slowly. And your usual spending habits no longer work. This is inflation, but not the kind you usually hear about. This inflation is driven by broken trade systems. It's slower, more persistent. And much harder to control. It quietly reshapes your life. When supply chains break, goods become harder to produce. When production slows, supply drops. And when supply drops, prices rise. It's a chain reaction. And it's happening globally. Energy costs play a major role in this. When fuel becomes expensive, everything else follows. Transportation costs increase. Production costs rise. And businesses pass those costs on to you. Even basic necessities are affected. Food production becomes more expensive. Storage and transport add extra costs. And suddenly, essential items feel like luxury. The pressure keeps building. Meanwhile, salaries don't increase at the same pace. Income stays almost the same. But expenses keep rising. This gap creates financial stress. And people begin to feel stuck. This is how the silent war affects you directly. Not through violence, but through economics. Not instantly, but gradually. And not visibly, but deeply. It changes how you live. And most people don't even realize the real cause. They blame companies or local factors. But the truth is much bigger. It's global. And it's connected to everything happening behind the scenes. As global trade weakens, something else begins to rise. Power starts concentrating in fewer hands. Not military power, but economic control. The ability to supply becomes the ultimate weapon. And some countries hold more of it than others. In this new world, resources define influence. Countries rich in energy gain leverage. Those controlling technology become indispensable. And those producing food hold silent authority. Power is no longer equal. Take energy, for example. Oil and gas control entire economies. When supply is limited, prices surge instantly. Nations dependent on imports feel immediate pressure. And those who control supply dictate terms. Then there are semiconductors. Tiny chips that power everything around you. From smartphones to cars to defense systems. Production is concentrated in very few places. And that creates a massive strategic advantage. Food is another critical factor. Countries with large agricultural output gain stability. Others depend on imports to feed their population. And when supply chains break, food security becomes a major concern. Hunger becomes a real risk. These resources create a new kind of hierarchy. Some countries become suppliers. Others become dependents. And this imbalance creates tension. Because dependency means vulnerability. In this silent war, control over supply chains is everything. It's not about who produces the most. It's about who controls the flow. Whoever controls the flow controls the outcome. And that control is highly strategic. Some countries are now using this control as leverage. They restrict exports when needed. They negotiate from positions of strength. And they influence global decisions quietly. Power is exercised without noise. This is not visible to most people. It doesn't make headlines every day. But it shapes global outcomes. Decisions made behind closed doors affect millions. And the world keeps adjusting silently. The balance of power is shifting slowly. Not through wars, but through trade control. Not through force, but through dependency. And the silent war continues to redefine who leads and who follows. As tensions grow, the global economy begins to split. Countries stop working as one unified system. Instead, they start forming smaller groups. Each group focuses on its own survival. And the world slowly divides. These groups are known as trade blocs. Nations align based on strategic interests. Not everyone is included. And not everyone benefits equally. The divide becomes more visible over time. Within these blocs, trade flows more freely. Agreements are strengthened internally. Supply chains are rebuilt within trusted partners. And cooperation continues, but only within limits. Outside these blocs, barriers increase. Tariffs rise again. Restrictions become stricter. And trade between rival groups becomes difficult. The global system starts fragmenting rapidly. This creates two parallel economies. One system for allies. Another for rivals. Goods, technology, and resources flow differently in each. And the gap between them keeps growing. Companies are forced to choose sides. They cannot operate freely everywhere anymore. Decisions become political as much as economic. And global expansion becomes more complicated. Risk increases significantly. Technology also becomes divided. Some countries restrict access to advanced systems. Others develop their own alternatives. Innovation continues, but in separate directions. And compatibility becomes an issue. Even financial systems begin to separate. Payment networks, currencies, and trade agreements evolve differently. The global financial structure becomes more complex. And less unified than before. For smaller countries, this creates difficult choices. They must decide which bloc to align with. Each decision carries risks and consequences. Neutrality becomes harder to maintain. And pressure increases. The idea of one global market is fading away. In its place, a divided system is emerging. Less efficient, more competitive, and more fragile. And this new reality is shaping the future of trade. As the world divides, the long-term consequences begin to unfold. Growth starts slowing across major economies. Trade inefficiencies begin to add up. Costs increase across industries. And the system becomes less productive overall. Businesses find it harder to expand globally. New markets come with political risks. Supply chains are no longer stable. And planning for the future becomes uncertain. Confidence starts to decline. Investments begin to slow down. Companies hesitate to commit large capital. Governments face increasing financial pressure. And economic momentum weakens gradually. The energy of growth starts fading. At the same time, inflation remains persistent. Prices don't drop easily once they rise. Supply inefficiencies keep costs elevated. And consumers continue to feel the pressure. Relief becomes difficult. Governments try to control the situation. They introduce policies to stabilize economies. Interest rates are adjusted. Spending is controlled. But the results are limited. The system is too complex to fix quickly. Inequality also begins to grow. Some countries adapt faster than others. Some industries benefit from the shift, while others fall behind. And the gap continues to widen. Smaller economies face the toughest challenges. They lack control over resources. They depend heavily on larger nations. And their options become limited. Survival becomes their main focus. Even large economies are not immune. Internal pressures start building. Political tensions increase. Public dissatisfaction grows. And economic decisions become more difficult. Stability is no longer guaranteed. The global system becomes more fragile over time. Small disruptions create large effects. Shocks spread faster and last longer. Recovery becomes slower. And uncertainty becomes the new normal. And the most important realization emerges. This is not a temporary phase. It's a structural shift in how the world operates. The rules of trade are changing, and the future will not look like the past. At this point, the world has already changed. Not suddenly, but gradually over time. Most people didn't notice it happening. But the system they relied on is no longer the same. And it may never go back. The idea of a fully connected global economy is fading. In its place, a more controlled system is emerging. Trade is no longer free in the same way. It is strategic, selective, and calculated. Every move has consequences. Countries are no longer just trading goods. They are negotiating power. Every deal is a calculated decision. Every agreement has hidden conditions. And every partnership comes with risks. Trust is no longer guaranteed. For businesses, the world has become more complex. Expansion is no longer just about opportunity. It's about navigating political and economic risks. Decisions are harder, and mistakes are costly. The margin for error is shrinking. For individuals, the impact is subtle but constant. Prices remain unpredictable. Opportunities shift unexpectedly. And financial stability becomes harder to maintain. Life becomes more uncertain. And yet, most people still look for simple explanations. They blame local issues or temporary events. But the reality is much deeper. It's global, interconnected, and evolving continuously. The real causes remain hidden. This silent war does not have a clear ending. There is no final battle or resolution. It continues quietly in the background, shaping economies, influencing decisions, and redefining power. And it will continue for years. The question is no longer whether the system will change. It already has. The real question is how far it will go. How much control will increase? And how much freedom will be reduced? The future remains uncertain. Because in this new world, control over trade means control over everything. Resources, technology, and supply chains define power. And those who control them shape the future. The balance is shifting continuously. And this brings us back to where we started. The changes you feel in your daily life are not random. They are part of something much larger. A system quietly transforming around you. A silent war you cannot see. By now, you can see the pattern clearly. These changes are not random or temporary. They are part of a much bigger transformation. A shift that is happening across the entire world. And it is accelerating. The system you grew up with is evolving. The rules of global trade are being rewritten. Old assumptions no longer hold true. And new realities are taking their place. Whether we notice it or not. Stability is becoming harder to maintain. Markets react faster than ever before. Decisions have immediate consequences. And uncertainty spreads quickly. The margin for error is shrinking everywhere. In this environment, adaptability becomes essential. Countries must adjust quickly or fall behind. Businesses must rethink their strategies constantly. And individuals must stay aware and prepared. Change is no longer optional. But adaptation is not easy for everyone. Some regions lack resources to respond effectively. Some industries cannot evolve fast enough. And some people are left behind. The gap continues to widen. This creates a new kind of global imbalance. Not just between countries, but within them. Opportunities become unevenly distributed. Wealth concentrates in certain areas. And inequality deepens further. And yet, the system continues to move forward. Quietly, steadily, and without pause. There is no reset button. No return to the past. Only progression into an uncertain future. And that future is already unfolding. The silent war does not announce itself. It does not demand attention openly. But it influences everything around you. Every price you pay. Every opportunity you get. Every decision you make. And now, you are part of it. Not as a participant by choice. But as someone affected by its consequences. Your daily life is connected to global trade. More than you might realize. And that connection is growing stronger. So the question is no longer about what is happening. That part is clear now. The real question is what happens next. How will this silent war evolve further? And what role will you play in it? Will the world become more divided over time? Will trade continue to fragment into smaller systems? Or will new forms of cooperation emerge? The answer is not simple. And it is still being written. One thing is certain. The era of simple globalization is over. What comes next will be more complex, more strategic, and more unpredictable than ever before. The world has entered a new phase. And in this new phase, awareness becomes power. Understanding what is happening gives you an advantage. It allows you to adapt better, to make smarter decisions, and to stay ahead of the change. Because ignoring these changes does not stop them. It only makes you more vulnerable. The system will continue to evolve, with or without your awareness. And the impact will continue to grow. The silent war will not end soon. It will continue shaping economies and societies. It will influence decisions at every level. And it will redefine what stability means. This is the new reality. And the most important truth is this: you are not separate from it. You are inside the system, affected by its outcomes every single day. Whether you see it or not. Whether you understand it or not. So the next time prices rise unexpectedly, or opportunities feel limited, or uncertainty increases, remember this moment. Remember what is happening behind the scenes. And remember that it is all connected. Because this is not just economics. It is power. It is strategy. It is control. And it is shaping the future of the world. Quietly, but decisively. And now, the final question. If this silent war is already shaping your life, what are you going to do about it? Will you stay unaware? Or will you start paying attention? The choice is yours. Tell me what you think. Is the world becoming more divided or more connected? Are we moving toward control or cooperation? Drop your answer in the comments below. Because this conversation is just beginning.